Hey, what's up guys, Alex here. Thank you for checking this video and welcome to another episode on how to build a WordPress plugin from scratch. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look on a bunch of annoying bugs that I found out while coding these things. And of course, these are pretty obvious bugs, but when you're developing something and when you're coding something, most of the times you miss bugs because you don't do the same steps that a regular user does. So usually when you're coding something, you add your data in the database in a different way that a regular user would do when he uses your plugin for the first time. So that's what we're going to do today. First, what you need to do is accessing your database from an SQL client. In my case, I'm using SQL Pro, and completely delete the AliCat plugin CPT. So let's delete this row that carries the array of data of all our plugins. And of course, after deleting this row, if we refresh our administration area, we're gonna have an error. So first bug identified, and the error is that the for each loop that we're using to print all our custom post types, generate all our custom post types, cannot start because we don't have anything to loop into it. So that data is completely empty. And I know that in the previous lesson, we took care of this issue by creating a method in the activate function, in the static function that gets called when the plugin is activated to check if the AliCat plugin CPT is empty. We should update the option by adding an empty array in it just to have that option. But we cannot be 100% sure that accidentally that specific record in the database gets deleted or is not there, or for whatever reason is not happening. So let's actually avoid to trigger this super annoying error here in case something happens in the database of the user and the AliCat plugin CPT option is not available. So let's basically copy this if statement, this condition from the activate class, and let's access the custom post type controller, that is the file that we're using to generate all the custom post types, and let's scroll down at the point where we are actually calling the get option AliCat plugin. So the error comes, and the error happens other than because in the error report I'm having the custom post type controller on line 172. I know exactly where this error is getting triggered. I know that this is happening because I'm trying to loop between options that are not there, like this option, it doesn't exist. So let's do a check, a simple if statement before. Let's paste that condition that we had, and if the get option is false, so we don't have the AliCat plugin CPT, let's just simply return the script. In PHP, if you write return without any value, this is a function that doesn't return any value, the execution of the script will get interrupted here. So if we save now and we go back in administration area, we refresh, the error is gone. That's perfect. If we access the CPT manager though, we have another problem. And the problem is that pretty much the same. We're trying to loop in between all our custom post types inside our CPT template. So let's access that file as well inside the templates, cpt.php, and here we have the get option. The setup of these options variable doesn't need to happen if this is empty. And in this case, because we are in an HTML template, we cannot return the script. We cannot interrupt the rendering of the HTML. So in our case, we can have an if-else statement condition or whatever, and it's gonna be something really cool. So I'm gonna show you a shorthand PHP if statement that it's really handy and I use it a lot. So what you could do here, probably you could do exactly the same and say that if the get option is not defined, we could have an $options variable that it's simply an empty array, so at least the for each can be triggered, but of course it will return empty. And here we could have an else condition that automatically fills up the options if this statement is false, so we actually have the AliCat plugin CPT. This is okay, this is normal, it's just a regular if-else statement, but we can optimize this script because we have a lot of code repetition. We are repeating this get option here and here in the same condition, plus we are redeclaring the same variable twice. And this is a sort of like a rule of thumb when you code your stuff. always try to identify where you're repeating the code a lot. If you're doing a repetition, if you're repeating the same variable, the same name, or you're using a lot of if-else statement conditions that do basically exactly the same, that's where you should spend a little bit of time in trying to optimize this code. And to optimize this code, it's actually really simple. So first, we can use an inline shorthand if statement of PHP. So let's comment this out, and let's say that we want to declare these options variable. And the options variable is going to be equal to inline if statement. The inline if statement is the statement, then question mark, then the first result in case the statement is true, then column, then the second result in case the statement, the original statement, is false. This is the syntax. So let's fill up this syntax. The check-in that we want to do is if the get option Alicat plugin is not set, like it's not there, it doesn't exist, let's return the empty array. Otherwise, we can safely return this option. Done. We have this inline if statement that if we save it and we go back in our administration area, we refresh, the error disappears because we have the empty array. And just to check that we're actually doing something correctly, let's var dump the options variable that we just created. So if we refresh, now we have an array with size 0, completely empty array. Perfect. But once again, I want to optimize this more because I don't really like. Also in this case, I have a repetition. I removed the repetition here or redeclaring the options variable, but here I'm repeating once again the get option twice. So the shorthand of PHP has an amazing approach that allows us to avoid to repeat the result value if the result is identical to the option that you're checking in the condition. So if the value that you're validating in the condition is identical to the result, we don't have to rewrite the result as a first true statement. So let's reorganize this. Let's comment this out and let's say, okay, once again, the options is gonna be equal to, let's check, instead of if is not set, let's check if this is set, question mark, let's use that. Otherwise, immediately attached a column symbol, let's print the empty array. Save it. Let's go back in our administration area. Let's refresh. There you go. No issues, no problems. And once again, if we var dump our options variable, we're gonna have an empty array with size 0 because that's what we defined. So these shorthand, it's amazing and it's super, super helpful. And the syntax can be kind of confusing, but just remember that before the question mark, there's the condition that it has to return true or false. It has to be like a regular condition. And if this condition is true with this syntax, automatically PHP will use the result of this condition. So if this get option is true, we'll use the get option. Otherwise, after the column, we'll use an empty array to store inside this options variable. And this is fantastic. Look how much cleaner and shorter our PHP code is. So why don't we simply copy this stuff and let's reuse it exactly the same inside the store custom post type controller. This was another example that I wanted to give you, but it's not a big deal. We can change it. So let's remove completely this thing and let's paste the options. Once again, the shorthand if inline statement. And this is fantastic. Now we don't have issues and errors anymore. Okay. So now if we access once again our database and we refresh, we don't have that option because we deleted manually. But if we go inside the plugins and we deactivate this thing and we reactivate our plugin, automatically our plugin on activation will take care of generating an empty array. So if we refresh now the WP option, we have in the Alicat plugin CPT an empty array and we have that data, which is perfect. That's what we wanted. So if we go now inside the Alicat CPT manager, here's completely empty. So now, one thing that we actually never did during this series of tutorial, and if you don't remember that we never did it, we actually never did it, I swear, we never created a new custom post type directly from the form. Our first custom post type was generated before we changed this into a repeater field, into something that you can update constantly and you can generate as many custom post types as you want. So we never actually tried to generate a custom post type from the form when our option was turned into an array. So let's give it a try and see if it actually works. Let's generate the usual comic book custom post type with comic book and comic books, and public and archive is set to true. Save changes. Okay, well, the settings have been saved, but I don't see any custom post type here. If I refresh, nothing is there. And if I go inside our database and I refresh the database, the array of custom post types is still empty, but I didn't have any PHP error. My form works because I used it in the past. So what's going on? Well, it's the way that we wrote our code. If we access back our code editor and we go inside the Inc API CPT callbacks where we're doing our CPT sanitize, here we set up the things as usual to do a validation and first grab the AliCat plugin CPT from the options, then loop through these options and see if we actually have a custom post type that match the unique name that we want to update. If we don't, let's update this. But the problem is inside the for each, because all the stuff that we're doing, it's happening inside the for each. But the for each is not getting triggered because the array is completely empty. So here we need to do another type of check. And the type of check that we can do, we can simply say, hey, if our output, it's basically 0, it carries 0 inputs, so doesn't have any pre-existing custom post type, we can check in PHP if an array is completely empty, is it 0, with the built-in method of PHP called count. So if the $output count is identical to 0, so double equal is identical to 0, we're gonna do something else. Instead of looping through this, we're gonna directly store this thing inside a new key of our post type, and we're gonna store our input. And then we can return the output that we just updated. So by doing this if statement without any else, we can return the output, because if the original AliCat plugin CPT is completely empty, it's 0, we just need to store the new custom post type and then return it. If this is false, this condition will not happen, so we can do safely our for each and then return the output. But if we return this before, the rest of the for each will not get triggered. So that's perfect. Let's save it. Let's go back in our admin area. Let's refresh. Let's go into add custom post type and let's create once again our comic book. Save changes. Ta-da! Now it's working. We have our comic book with all the stuff that we saved, and that's perfect. And if we access our database and we refresh the options, now we have our comic books. Fantastic. So we solved also these other bugs. The last bug that I want to fix today is something related to the way that I'm printing this information, because I'm not checking if this information are in there or not. I'm simply printing them. And I know that the ID, singular name and plural name are required, and I'm gonna fix that by setting the form as required, so I cannot submit the form if it's empty, but the public and archive can actually be unchecked. So let me show you an example. First, let's access our cpt.php template, and here in the generation of the form, we're printing our options. So let's access our cpt callbacks, where we have our input text, where is regular text, and right after the placeholder, we can say required. Or I think from HTML5, you can just simply put required. Let's give it a try. Let's refresh here in the add custom post type. And let's check if this input is actually required. Yes, the input field is required. So if I try to save the changes, the form cannot be submitted because the built-in required method of HTML will prevent the form to get submitted. And of course, I put the required to every single input field, input text. You could change it and make it modular by simply passing an option, like we're passing the argument for label 4. You could pass the argument for required if you want. want, but it's not a big deal. I don't need to do it right now. Let's say that every single field needs to be required in my occasion, in my situation. So let's leave it like that. So now that this form has these three options that are required, I cannot submit it. Unfortunately, public and archive, because our checkbox cannot be required because the user could potentially have a custom post type that doesn't want it to have an archive or doesn't want it to be public. So let's see what it happens when we do something like that. Let's create our product custom post types, but let's leave public and archive unchecked and click Save Changes. Well, the settings have been saved, but here I have a bunch of problems. This is worse than a Christmas tree during Christmas Day. Everything is light up, we have a bunch of colors and a bunch of errors. Well, all the errors that we're having are only related to the public and archive, because these are the only two options that are different from the first custom post type that we generated, and we didn't have any error. So we have here what is happening. The CPT PHP on line 22, it's not actually properly printing something, undefined index as archive, undefined index public. And then we have the same problem on the custom post type controller on line 208 and 215. And here, of course, because we're printing, we are triggering the headers already sent, all this kind of stuff. But let's take care of first of the custom post type controller. Let's go inside our code editor, inside custom post type controller, and the error says on line 208. Let's scroll on line 208 and see that here we have, the definition of the public. And the definition of the public, we are simply passing the option public, but because in the form we didn't check those, in the submission of the form the option public wasn't there. So in our database we don't have that. If we access the database, we refresh it and we access the data here, you can see that in the comic book, that is the first one that I created, I have the public key and the as archive. But in the product, that is the second one, we don't have public and as archive, and that's where the error is coming from. I cannot tap this public key from the option array because it doesn't actually exist. And to solve this problem, we can do an if statement, an inline if statement, like we did at the beginning here, like we did to check. If this is set, let's return the value, otherwise let's return something else. And we know that if the user doesn't specify the option public as checked, it means that doesn't want that post type to be public. So let's check. Is this public? Okay, if this public, use it. Otherwise, let's return false. And let's do exactly the same for the archive. Is this has archive key exist? If it does, let's use it. Otherwise, let's return false. Let's save it. Let's go back in our administration area. Let's refresh. Oh, still the error. Oh, sorry. This is not enough because this option doesn't exist. So we have to actually write is set, and not simply expect this to be true or false. We need to check, is this option in an array actually set or it exists? If it doesn't, perfect. Okay, so the initial three errors are gone, so we solved the issue in the custom post type. We need to do exactly the same for the cpt.php at line 22, where we actually generating our template and we're printing with the for each option the same. We are tapping the option public and the option has archive. So in order to fix that, let's simply declare a bunch of variable that it's going to be really useful. First, let's say $public, it's equal, and inline statement, once again, is set. Let's copy this option, let's cut this option public. If this is set, let's say is true, or actually let's return it as a string because I want this to be a string. Yes, it's public, otherwise we can return as false. And here you have the ability to put whatever you want. You can put an image, an icon, a thumbs up, thumb down, a cross, whatever. And then we can pass this variable here, public. And we can do exactly the same for has archive. So we can change this to archive. Let's put this as archive and let's replace the variable option key has archive with the variable archive that we are defining here, and it's inside the for each loop because for every custom post type we're redefining this variable and we are checking again if those options are set. Let's save it. Let's go back in our administration area. Let's refresh. There you go. Now it's 10 times better. Look at that. Awesome. So, did you like what I did? And do you understand why I had to do this? Whenever you're coding something, try once in a while to stop your process and use your software like you were a new user that never actually used that software before. Try to do everything that a regular user does. Install the plugin, activate the plugin, try to generate something. Don't assume that because our plugin works with the settings that we currently have, automatically will work out of the box with empty settings, or assuming that we took care of every single aspect and we're gonna ship a bug-free code. Absolutely not. Most of the times, because we're doing all these things in the process and we're manipulating and we're tinkering with the database, sometimes we break things without even realize it. So hope this was helpful for you. So it's pretty much it for today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe to my channel. And if you want, you can check the support me page of my website, where you can find all different ways and methods to support me, support my channel, and help me to do better videos and better tutorials for you. Thank you again, guys, and until the next lesson, as usual, happy coding!